I've been stewing a silent beef with today's guest for 4 long years. It's time to get some answers. So I'm welcoming Tim Bogatz of Art Ed Radio and the Art of Education to geek out with me about what we have in common, including all things art history and what it's like to leave the classroom to work with teachers around the world. This is Cindy Ingram, and welcome to the Art Class Curator podcast, where we're taking art out of the dark with thoughtful explorations and in-depth interviews designed to ignite curiosity and delight in art classrooms everywhere. I am so excited to welcome Tim Bogatz to the podcast from the Art of Education. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit more about you and your background and experiences?
I went to the University of Iowa for undergrad and got my art ed degree. I thought about going to art school and decided that I really did just want to be an art teacher. And it sounded terrible to get a BFA and then go back for a teaching certification. Yeah. It just seemed like too much work. And so I went to Iowa, like I said, and I grew up in Nebraska, actually went to University of Iowa for school and then moved back to start teaching. And so I'm in Omaha now, and I taught elementary art for a couple years, traveling around to a ton of different schools. I had 7 different schools that I went to, taught like 1,000 kids.
In 1 year?
Yes. It was a crazy schedule. So yeah, I'd spend like 3 days at one school and then 4 days at the next school and then 6 at the next, depending on how many kids were at each school, and constantly traveling, constantly moving. And it was kind of a nightmare, but I did that for 2 years. And then a high school job opened up in the district I was in, and I applied and got that. And then I was teaching there for 12 years and really loved every minute of that. But in the meantime, as I was doing that, I also started writing for the Art of Ed website. And then from that writing, I started teaching courses, and then I started doing a podcast. And eventually it just made sense for me to come on full time with the Art of Ed. And so for the last 2.5 years, I've been doing podcasting and writing and videos and a little bit of everything behind the scenes. And it's weird to be out of the classroom, but I really, really enjoy it.
Yeah. Do you miss the classroom?
I do miss the classroom. And there are certain parts, I feel like I should qualify that actually. I miss being in the classroom and I miss working with kids. I don't miss, random tardy referrals and doing like lunchroom duty and all of those, all of the paperwork and all the bureaucracy and all that stuff that you dislike with administration. I don't miss that at all, but I love working for the Art of Ed. I love the challenges that kind of come with that. I feel like we're doing so many new and exciting things that, that makes me not miss teaching. Like I really thought I didn't know how it was going to go. And I do miss teaching a little bit, but there's just so many great things going on with AOE that I really do love that.
Yeah. And you get to teach just in a different way. So I feel the same way. It's like I miss teaching students and I miss the kids and the interaction with the kids, but I still get to teach. It's just in a different.
It is. It's a different way. And I think, one thing that you and I are both doing is, we are able to share our ideas, and our ideas are able to get out to so many more people. I don't know if you've had the same kind of experience or thought about it like that before, but, when I was teaching and I had a great idea, I got to my 150 kids and that was about it. But if I share that great idea in an article and, we have 10,000 people read that or 8,000 people listen to a podcast or whatever it is, just think of like how many students that reaches. And I think that's a really powerful thing. And I really like that.
I do too. If I ever feel stressed or down or alone in my house doing this job, I realize like I'm not. Like you think about all the students across the world that are like doing my lessons right this minute. Yes. Like that's crazy to think about. Someone went to Kyrgyzstan this summer and like used my resources to teach kids in I can't even say the name of the country, honestly. I've been meaning to practice it. I just get I don't know. It's a lot.
No, it's awesome though. I mean, just thinking about that and like, we do our online conferences with AOE and we have people attending from all around the world. Like there's people from the Philippines watching at like 3 a.m. Like, this is amazing. I love it. I love the reach that we're able to have.
Yeah, it's exciting. So one of the main parts of your job is your podcast. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and why you started that?
Yeah. So I do Art Ed Radio is the name of the podcast. And we started it, almost 2.5 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. And it originally was myself and Andrew McCormick, who was another guy that worked for AOE. He teaches in Iowa. And we did a lot of back and forth, a lot of witty banter. It was a lot of fun. And, we would bring on guests every once in a while, but most of the time, it was just us. And, we talk about everything related to art teaching, and it may be some really big picture stuff like what is the future of art education, or it may be really minor things, like who are 8 artists that you really enjoy teaching, and it's everything in between. And so we had that going really well for a long time. And then after a couple of years, Andrew just got too busy with all of the other stuff that he was doing, and he stepped away from the podcast. So now it's been me just interviewing a lot of different people from, all over the art education spectrum, which I really enjoy. Keeps me on my toes, finding new guests every single week, which is pretty fun. But it's been a little different, but I definitely enjoy it still. So.
Yeah, just getting to have so many conversations. I was always worried I would run out of things to talk about on a podcast, yes. And that's why I never started one for a long time. And then I was like, I've been doing this for so long, I'm never going to run out of things to talk about. It's just a matter of framing it differently. So
yeah, and with me, like every once in a while, I'll just be out of ideas. We've done how many 130 episodes now, wow. And so like you run out of topics. But then you'll talk to somebody, you'll get somebody as a guest, and then sometimes you can just say, "What do you want to talk about?" And just develop a whole episode from there. There's just such a wealth of ideas out there that I don't think we're going to run out of ideas anytime soon.
Yeah, well, and I love it too that the people listening feel like you're a part of their lives. Like an art teacher, they're usually the only one on the campus most of the time, especially your elementary art teachers. And so they have people that they can listen to, that they can feel like they have coworkers that care about the things that they care about, and they get to hear their voice. And I think that's really so wonderful about podcasts.
I love that. And I feel like there's some pressure there that like you have to, every week you got to be there with, a new episode waiting for people. But then, I think about, I have my own favorite podcasts, and, I look forward to Monday afternoon when this one gets released, and Thursday morning. And so, if I can be that for somebody else, that's a great feeling. Like if they're excited to listen to me every week, I think that's an awesome thing. And I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah. One of my favorite podcasters just disappeared in May and hadn't posted an episode until yesterday. And then I got the email yesterday and I was like, oh my gosh, So it was so exciting. It's weird. Okay. So we get the privilege of pretty much talking about anything we want to talk about in our job. We're passionate about art and art teaching. What is your favorite thing to talk about?
Oh man, there's a lot. I think probably my very favorite is classroom management, because I feel like people struggle so badly with classroom management. And it was one thing that I don't know if I want to say I was great at it, but it always came kind of naturally to me. Like I feel like I always have a good rapport, good relationships with my students. And, from there, when you sit and think about, hey, what's successful, when I'm running my classroom, what's good about that? You just come up with so many tips and tricks. And when you can pass those on to people, especially when it's not something that they've thought about, it's not something they've reflected on, but if you can share those ideas and they really help people, they're just so appreciative of that, because like I said, classroom management is something that everybody struggles with. And so when you have something that's successful and it can pass on, it can be successful for them. Like I said, they appreciate it so much, and you feel like you really are making a difference with that. So I think that's always good. I love talking about instructional strategies, just different ways to present different media, different ways to present techniques and topics and ideas. I think that's always fun, because like we talked about before, there's so many great ideas out there. And so when you can bounce ideas off of other teachers, especially when, like you said, they're people on an island, they're the only person on campus. If we can set up that collaboration, I think that's a really powerful thing as well. And then obviously I love art history, and there's just so many amazing stories and so much to teach, as you well know. There's so much to do with art history that I love that as well.
That's awesome. And I love, the things that you chose, the art of teaching, well, the first two of your three, because a lot of, I think art teachers go in and they know the content really well. They know how to draw, they know perspective. They know art history to a degree, whatever, they don't get a lot of art history education, but when they get into a classroom, like, what do you do next? And so I think having people out there that are saying, okay, this is how you teach this, and this is a different way than you were taught, because most of us were taught art in a very singular way. So
it is. And I think that, just with the explosion of social media and websites like yours, like ours, there's so many ideas out there to be shared, and we don't have to be in that bubble anymore. And so if there is something in particular that you're struggling with, there is probably somebody on Instagram with great ideas. There's probably an article on AOE. There's probably a lesson on your site. There's probably somebody with a blog who's still writing blogs that has some ideas on what you can do. And I think it's amazing that there's so many ideas out there, and I think it helps everyone when you can share all of that.
Yes, definitely. So since you said one of your favorite things is art history, let's talk about art history.
Yes.
I get this question all the time is, do I teach art history alone by itself, or do I teach art history as part of a project or a unit? What do you do?
I'm going to cop out twice here. And number one, I'm going to say do both. And number two, I'm going to ask you first, what do you do?
My answer is both too.
Okay.
I'm like, I can't answer that, so I'm going to make you answer it. Nice.
Fine, turn it back around. So I do a lot of art history tied in with particular artists. If we have, charcoal drawings that we're going to do, I love to show Jim Dine, and I love to show, there's an Omaha artist named Ken Bellows who does great stuff with that. I love to show Robert Longo, and, just artists like that naturally tie in. And I'm not a believer in having kids copy artists. That doesn't work for me. That doesn't leave room for originality. But I'm huge on, artists inspiring kids or showing kids particular techniques. Like if we go back to the Jim Dine idea, he has so many great things he does with mark making, and how he, uses his pencils, how he uses his charcoal, how he puts all of these different things into their drawing. And I show kids, hey, maybe you like idea A, here's how you could incorporate it. Maybe you like technique B, could you do that in your own drawing? We'll practice that in our sketchbooks. If they find something they love, maybe it gets incorporated into what they're doing. And so having that influence or that inspiration, I think, can be really worthwhile. And so, in that way, I like to make it, part of the project that we're doing. But, just teaching art history for art history's sake is a really fun thing to do for me. Just thinking about all the stories of, artists, what they make, their lives, George O'Keeffe, Frida Kahlo come to mind immediately, just with fascinating lives, fascinating experiences that you can tell kids about that they love. And I think that's an awesome thing. And so in my classroom, what I always did was we had Art History Friday. And so every Friday I would have just a collection of one artist's work ready to go. And so kids just knew they'd come in, grab their sketchbook, and up on the projector would be an artist. And then I'd have just basic information like their name, where they're from, when they lived, what they're famous for. And so they just would copy down that, and that's kind of the bell ringer as we first get started, just getting kids in their seats ready to go. And then I would just go through a handful of their works, and I don't know how in depth you want me to get here.
No, I'm loving it. Keep going.
Okay. I would go through maybe a half dozen works, and what I would have kids do is I would just have them sketch out what they're seeing. And it didn't need to be good drawings at all. We would always go through, and what I would tell them is it doesn't have to be great. I just want you to be able to look at your sketch and remember what the painting was, or look at what you drew and be able to visualize that sculpture. And so just go through quick sketches, 30 seconds, a minute on each thing. And if there are good questions, that I could ask about that, open-ended things, discussion topics, then I would be, happy to have kids just write a little bit. And then we would go through, like I said, a half dozen works. We would talk a little bit about the work, or if there's a good story or stories that go on with their life, I'm happy to share those stories. And so sometimes it takes 5 minutes. If there's a lot of good stories, it takes 15 minutes. And then to wrap it up, I would always do some kind of higher order thinking skills with, kids evaluating what they saw or ranking the works, from favorite to least favorite, just sharing their opinions about what they saw. And so they're practicing writing, they're thinking a lot, they're getting a little bit of art history, and hopefully, getting a little bit of entertainment when I'm telling stories about their lives or stories behind the artwork as well.
Well, I love that lesson. There's so much variety in what you accomplish in that one classroom. And I love that ranking the works activity. That evaluation step is hard to do. Besides just really saying, what do you like? That's a really good one. So do you just pick artists you're interested in randomly, or do you have some sort of like thematic approach or chronological approach when you pick these artists?
It kind of depends on my class, to be honest. It depends on what I'm teaching. The chronological thing with my AP students, the really advanced kids, we actually start with contemporary art and work our way backwards, which is kind of a fun way to do things, where we just, show them all sorts of contemporary artists because that's what kids are most interested in. And then we kind of work our way backwards, let's say we're looking at Banksy's work, right now. And then, in a couple weeks, as we're working our way backwards, maybe we look at, Basquiat, or maybe we look at Keith Haring and say, how does this street art influence what we've seen already? And then you just kind of work your way back and see where these influences came from. And I think that's kind of an interesting way to do things, because kids are kind of hooked on art history if you start with the most exciting stuff and then work your way backwards. And, I always tell them that art history is kind of this story that evolves. Everything that's made is a response to what came before it. And it's a little different to tell that story backwards, but I think it works. And then, I don't really do thematic necessarily. I just try and find artists that either I'm interested in or I think kids are interested in. And, kids are always fascinated by people who can draw super realistically. So we always throw a few of those in. Sometimes that interests me, sometimes it doesn't. But, if the kids are into it, I think that's important. I love, like I said, artists with great stories, or surrealists are fantastic because their life outside of art is just usually pretty entertaining as well. Yeah. Their works, there's so much to look at and so many stories to tell. I think that's awesome. And then I just try and find a really diverse set of artists. A long time ago, one of our first podcasts, we had Don Massey on, who I know was on your show not too long ago. But the episode was called No More Dead White Guys. And I think that's an important thing. We can't spend all of our time talking about old European masters. There's value there. There's a place for that, but it can't dominate the conversation. I think if it does, we're doing a disservice to our students. So I try and find a lot more diverse artists, a lot more contemporary artists that kids are actually into, that are actually excited to talk about.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. And when I started my website, I made a very deliberate choice to not focus on the dead white guys. I do have them in there. You'll find them, but if you look at my search results for the site, people are always looking for Van Gogh and they're looking for, Da Vinci, but they're not going to find a whole lot on there, because I think there's just so much more. And that when we choose to focus on those, we're leaving behind so many powerful artists. And art history is so big. And I love that, a lot of people get really overwhelmed by the vastness of it. How am I going to cover everything? So I'm going to stick with the dead white guys because I can't leave them out. So I think it's just important, you're not going to cover everything, and it's fine. And pick things that are interesting and fascinating and that the kids like, and, that teaches them to be, real exciting people in the world. Okay, awesome. So you mentioned a lot of artists in our conversation today. And the very first interaction I ever had with you, when I very first started my blog, and I don't know if you remember this at all because I had just started my blog, in the comments of an Art of Education article, you talked about how you hated Picasso. It was in response to something that I had said. I don't remember. It was seriously 4 years ago.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And you were you hated Picasso. It was a long time ago. But I've always been when I talk to him, I'm going to ask him, why does he hate Picasso so much? So here I am, 4 years later, finally getting my chance Tell me why you hate Picasso. Or do you still hate him?
I feel like we should have talked about this a long time ago. I feel like this has been bothering you for a while.
I know. It's really been weighing heavily on me, and I'm just like so excited you're here to hash this out.
This is the real reason you had me on, right?
It is.
My Picasso opinion, my hot take.
Yeah.
I have never connected with Picasso. And, I don't know how much you want me to talk about this, but it started with me just not feeling a connection with his work. You see stuff and, you're like, I don't really like this. He's got this huge collection of work, and I like, honestly, maybe 4 or 5 paintings that he's ever done in his life. And, I need to qualify that and say, I appreciate, what he's done. And I definitely feel in the minority when everybody's like, he's responsible for the entire 20th century. And I'm like, I'm not feeling it, guys. Sorry. And so anyway, it really kind of, it's just kind of been a meh sort of reaction about him for so long. I've never liked it, but I've never really been able to put into words why. But
interesting.
Well, I think I have it now, because back in January, I was in Kansas City, and at the Nelson Atkins Museum, they had this huge Picasso exhibit, and it was incredible. It had, not only all of his work, but all kinds of work that influenced him, that inspired him. Like, they found this collection that was in Paris in like 1907 in this museum where Picasso was visiting all the time. And they tried to bring some pieces from that collection into the museum in Kansas City. And so you would see these original, African masks and these like oceanic artworks like right next to what that inspired and what that influenced. And that was really fascinating for me to be able to see that, because, there's so many connections there, and it really made me kind of appreciate him more intellectually. And so I was talking about this, with my wife as we're going through this, and I'm like, how come I appreciate this, on an intellectual level, but I still don't connect with it? And, she said, and what I think that is kind of my reasoning here, like, it's very impressive intellectually, but it doesn't move me emotionally. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but it kind of did to me, where, there's all this great work and everybody loves it, but I just have never been able to get into it. And like I said, I can appreciate it, but there's nothing there that really speaks to me. There's nothing there that really stirs up any emotion whatsoever. And so, I appreciate his place in art history, but it's just not something personally that I like. And so it's indifference at this point, I should say.
Yeah, that's how I feel about Monet, actually. Everyone else,
okay.
I have the exact same. But I think it's a testament to making sure we show our kids a variety of art, because you are meh and nothing moves you emotionally about Picasso. I wept in front of a Picasso painting for an hour and changed the whole course of my career because of a Picasso painting. So it's like, his paintings. And then when I saw Guernica, I was totally wrecked. And so, but then, you might be totally emotional about some other painting, and I think it's meh. So I think that's such an important testament to really show our kids the wide variety that art has to offer.
And I still teach Picasso to every one of my classes, because you can't leave him out. And, I try and not let my opinion come into it. There are certain things where, you just let kids make a decision on their own, whether they like it or not. I don't want to influence them one way or the other.
Though kids do like it sometimes when you tell them if you don't like something, because they're expected to like everything. And then we find out the teacher doesn't like it. They're like, oh, okay, I cannot like something. That's cool. I can see that. Yeah. Do you want them to have respect for it and appreciate it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, like I said, I think it's powerful when you as the teacher are really excited about something.
Yeah. And
that can get kids excited as well. But I'm always afraid of the inverse of that. Like, I'm always afraid of discouraging a kid from liking something if I don't like it.
Yeah, that's a good point. So show a wide variety for sure.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. So I'm so glad that I now got to hear your answer to that question. And 4 years later, we can stop the conversation now. Podcast is over. Got what I needed.
You've accomplished your goal.
So funny. And you were probably like, this is a random person on the internet. You probably had any recollection. I don't even know where it is. It's so funny. Okay. I don't even know what it was, what your post was about or anything.
I feel like, okay. So what I think it was, I'm not sure if I remember this correctly, but I did an article I wrote an article about artists that you don't like. And so I started out by admitting that I don't really like Picasso. I interviewed a bunch of other teachers about, who they didn't like. And Picasso came up like twice more. So it really seemed like we were just bashing Pablo Picasso for an entire article. So I feel like I need to go look that up now and see.
You have a lot of opinions on the internet that people are getting upset about for 4 years. Okay. All right. So what are some of your favorite artists to teach that you may or may not have already mentioned?
So I'll try and go through a few that I have not mentioned. I do need to start with Banksy, though, because I love Banksy, but more importantly, every kid that I've ever taught pretty much loves Banksy. And just like, the whole street art, the whole what can you get away with sort of thing is fantastic. And just the sort of the darkness of it and the sense of humor and the irreverence, like kids really love Banksy. How long do you want this list to be, by the way? Because, we could go through
like a couple. 50. I don't know. No, I'll talk about it all day. So
Claes Oldenburg is so much fun with his giant sculptures. And I've got a couple behind the scenes story. Like I've got to sit on a Claes Oldenburg soft sculpture before.
Oh, cool.
So I get to tell those sorts of stories. And so kids are always into that. It's always fun. Frida and Georgia O'Keeffe, I mentioned, just amazing life stories going along with all of their artwork. I love Ana Mendieta, and that's who we're going to talk about when we get to what artwork changed my life later. Oh. But she does amazing artwork that is ephemeral. Like it does not last long at all. She does certain sculptures that are only around for 12 hours and things like that. And so that gets kids thinking about all sorts of, different ways to, make art and different possibilities that are out there. So I think that's always spectacular. Then, I mentioned Surrealists, and one that a lot of people don't know, but I love is Remedios Varo. She does artwork there. And, she is somebody that I think is really important to kind of add into the Surrealist teaching that you do. So, those are just a handful off the top of my head that I
Did she do that one that was like the bird lady with a clock?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. I love that one. Yeah, she's awesome.
Great stuff. Okay, can I turn that around on you? I want to know your favorite artist to teach too.
Okay. Well, I love the Mexican modernists. So there's Frida and Diego, but there are so many more of that same time period that's just so rich and emotional and amazing, like David Siqueiros and Rosa Rolanda. And then there's like all these. I went to a DMA, Dallas Museum of Art exhibit a couple of years ago, and it just changed my whole perspective on the world, seeing that exhibit and seeing the richness. And I love art that's really emotional. So when I saw that exhibit too, I was teaching mostly Latino students. And so it was really good because I got to share with them the exhibit and they were really excited about it too. So I love those. I actually really like to teach. I hate Monet. Like, I don't hate him. I just don't like him. But I like to teach Impressionism. It's actually one of my favorite things to teach because I think it's so interesting, like this turning point where it's like a switch was flipped from the past to the present. And I really enjoyed teaching Impressionism. Yeah. And I love like the weird Gothic stuff, like the borders of the illuminated manuscripts and the stained glass windows, like the little weird stuff happening in the corners.
They sneak in there. Yeah.
I like weird art and art that's really like emotionally moving. Yeah. Probably. But one of my favorite artists are Mexican or like early 20th century art from Mexico. So that changes daily though. I go through phases. So that's been pretty steady for a couple of years now though. When I think of, if you tell me an artwork, that's the first thing that pops in my mind when you say what's your favorite artwork. I picture everything in that exhibit. So
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Okay. So you talked about your Art History Fridays. What are some other ways you like to make art history entertaining? You mentioned a lot too about telling the story of the artist, and that's something I don't do as much. I kind of generally let the art speak for itself and let the kids kind of come up with their own stories. So can you tell us more about how you do that?
Yeah, well, a big part of it is just I'm an art history nerd and I've read so much over the years, and I like Mexican muralists, for example. Like there's so much drama there. Like talking about, Frida and, just how she was so sick as a kid, talking about her bus crash when she was 16, and then how she got together with Diego and just their whole marriage and the affairs that go with that. And Diego ended up sleeping with her sister. And I mean, there's just so much just messy drama there that it's love. And, you have to decide what's appropriate and how much you want to share. But I had the advantage of teaching high school and you can get away with a little bit more. But, just any of that sort of behind the scenes stuff that kids love, they love to get into that. Or like, I like to teach about Goya and how he, originally started out, working for royalty, being this royal painter with these portraits. And then, you just talk about how he slowly, started losing control of his faculties, started to go crazy. And then he just painted all of these giant, intense paintings. Kids just love knowing, where that kind of stuff comes from and what's going on, in the world besides, just the painting itself. Or Salvador Dali and all of his weird antics. You can find YouTube clips of him and just
those are awesome.
How out there he was. And so anytime you can find stuff like that, that's just a little bit outside, but still kind of connected or paints a better picture of the artist's personality or their influences, I think that's really worthwhile.
Yeah, and it's fun to see those hints of their life in their art too. I mean, Frida, it's all in her art. It's all there. But, you can see the others. It's fun to notice that. Like I this summer went to the Vincent van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. Mm-hmm. And I like Van Gogh. I've always loved him. I think his art is wonderful. I'm not a huge fan like everyone else is, but I liked it. But I went to that museum and I got to see more fully the story of his life and his psychology and, everything that's going on in his life. And now I'm in love with him, because I got to know him through the story of his life. And when you really kind of connect with an artist's emotions. But then you've got the flip side. And now I like Picasso less because I learn more and more about Picasso and his terrible ways. So it's interesting. Like, do you let the art speak for itself or do you tell the story? Or
I mean, I don't know. I feel like there's so many opportunities and so many rich stories that I feel like you're almost remiss if you know great stories and don't tell them. Let me ask you this question though. Okay, if you had the opportunity to go to Monet's garden in Giverny, would you
I did. I went this summer.
Okay. And you still don't like him?
Well, I like him more. I do like him more. I learned a lot about him. I didn't realize what a rich son of a gun he is. He was so rich.
Yes.
And everyone in the town hated him. But I did see his art differently because he composed his art before he ever painted it with that garden. Mm-hmm. He created the compositions through gardening. Yes. And then he chose what part he was going to paint and then he painted them. So he pictured Impressionism as he's just going out and painting and doing this fast thing. No, it was a layered thing. It was really interesting. And actually there was someone with me that came on the tour with me who Monet was her favorite. And she actually, I think, liked him maybe a little bit less at the end when she realized what kind of a jerk he was. But his house was cool because he had all those Japanese prints. Have you been to it?
I have not been there.
Oh, it was neat.
I would love to go.
It was definitely worth the time. We spent a whole day and it was beautiful. It was just, the gardens were so stunningly beautiful. And his house, he had Cézannes and Renoir, he had all the walls were covered with art of his contemporaries and also Japanese prints. It was cool. And the town was super charming.
Yeah,
as well.
Awesome.
But it did make me think of him differently. So, cool. And testament to travel, you should do that too.
Yes.
Yeah, you should go. I did like it. So awesome. Well, I guess everyone knows The Art of Ed, but can you tell us a little bit how to get to your podcast and how to get to the resources that you create?
Yeah. So AOE, just theartofed.com. We have our magazine, our courses, our podcasts. We have our conferences. We have Art Ed Pro, our PD stuff. Just there's a lot there. So
anything and everything.
Anything related, you can just come in and search by subject, and I guarantee you there's a ton. If you just want to get to the podcast, just artedradio.com, and that'll take you to all of the episodes we've ever done. New ones come out every Tuesday, and obviously you can subscribe in iTunes or Stitcher, where you get podcasts. And then if anybody wants to connect with me personally, I'm on Twitter, just at Tim Bogatz. And I'm really bad at social media, but I do Twitter and not much else. So that's where I am personally.
Awesome. There's a lot of art teachers on Twitter. I cannot get into it. It looks like I'm on Twitter. If you go to my Twitter, there's a lot of tweets, but it's all automated. I don't actually go on there. I go on there every now and then. I'm like, oh, people have sent me messages. I did not see those. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Okay. My last question, and you already hinted at your answer, so I can't wait to hear your story, but which artwork changed your life?
It is Ana Mendieta, and she had a sculpture series called the Silueta series. And I didn't know anything about her until I took a contemporary art course in college, contemporary art history, and we had to write an entire paper on a single artwork. And for whatever reason, like my top 3 ones that I was thinking about had been taken. And so I'm like, okay, we'll try this out. And so I had to start researching Ana Mendieta and all of her artwork. And as I talked about before, it's just this fascinating set of ephemeral sculptures. And she had a lot of different nature or, related to nature sculptures that involved her silhouette or her body. And so she would do things like, create a silhouette of her body in the sand. And it is a really powerful thing on its own. But then you just think about it, as soon as high tide comes in, that sculpture is going to be gone. So it's got this temporary feel to it. But then she would also do things like burn her silhouette into a tree trunk with gunpowder, which is just awesome already. But then you think about it, like it's ephemeral. Also, like that's not a permanent sculpture, but it is going to be there for 20 or 30 years until like all of the bark on that tree grows back over it. And so just the relative difference between those and, everything that kind of went in between was fascinating to me. And so I started writing a lot about that. And, it just took me off on all these other art history tangents that she connected with. And it really made me appreciate things a lot more. And so I started looking more and more into her. And then speaking of messy drama, like her life, oh my goodness, she was married to the sculptor Carl Andre. And he actually threw her, this was not proven, but threw her out of their 34th story apartment in New York City and murdered her. But then and then he had this like dramatic tale that he told and went through this like sham trial and was acquitted of this. And so talking about artists we hate, Carl Andre and his minimalist bricks.
I'm going to go stomp on them even harder next time when I'm allowed to do that.
Yeah, it's pretty. So this crazy backstory, she was an immigrant from Cuba. But anyway, so she created all of these amazing artworks for just a few years, like less than a decade until she was killed. But anyway, I just kept reading and writing and I ended up with a 27-page paper on this single artwork because there are just so many connections and so many things that I wanted to write. And more than anything, that was what gave me my appreciation for everything that art history could be, because there's this great work. There is this meaningful work. There are things that are pushing the boundaries. There are connections to so many different things. And there's also, the life story outside of just the artwork. And it showed me like how rich and how deep art history can be. And it really sort of secured my love for art history for the rest of my life.
Yeah. It's like we will never run out of amazing tales. That's crazy. I'm just Googling her while you were talking. Wow.
Yeah. If anybody's down for like a 600-page book, there's a book called Naked by the Window, and author's last name is Katz. I don't remember his first name, Katz, but it's just a fascinating story about her death and Carl Andre's trial after that. And it just casts so much suspicion on him. Like he's just,
That's wild. I had never heard about Carl Andre being someone people hate until just like in the last few days. And I saw it and then I was like, I want to research that. And then I never did. So now I know why. Murder.
Now you know.
Oh, geez. Crazy town.
So,
okay.
That's not the most pleasant way to end this.
Now that we've depressed you all, have a great day. Thanks. Thanks for listening.
No, everybody look up Ana Mendieta and you will be fascinated by her work. And that will be our positive takeaway from this.
Yeah, you really will. And don't Google it while you've got students in the room. Just not safe for work. Yeah. Don't Google that until you're home. Awesome. Well, thank you so very much for joining me on the podcast today. And thank you for all of the work you do for the teachers around the globe. You're making a big impact.
You. No, I appreciate you letting me chat for a while. It's been really fun talking to you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and give us an honest rating on iTunes. This will help other teachers find us and hear these amazing stories. Do you want even more art inspiration? Sign up for Art Class Curator's once a week email newsletter, Your Weekly Art Break. Teacher Sarah Warnock says, I truly do take a break from my busy week to check all your links and feel inspired. Everything you share is relevant, meaningful, and also super helpful. You definitely help me become a better art teacher, and I look forward to your emails each week. You can sign up at artclasscurator.com/artbreak. And as a free gift for subscribing, you'll get 6 free art interpretation worksheets to use in your classroom. Be sure to tune in next week for more inspiring art interviews. Thanks again to Tim for clearing up his opinions on Picasso. I can finally take that stew off the stove. Check out Art Ed Radio for more time with Tim, including the new episode tomorrow with yours truly. I'll link to my interview on Art Ed Radio in the show notes at artclasscurator.com/24. Thanks again, Tim. Next week, I'm talking with Marcia Beckett of Art is Basic about her work in a school of academically gifted kids. Keep listening to hear a preview of my interview with Marcia.
First, it causes me to reflect on the individual lessons and what went well, what needs to be improved upon. And then, interestingly enough, if I decide, I shouldn't put this on my blog, and then I think about why, what didn't go well, why wouldn't I want to share that with other people? And then there's my answer usually, But also, since I started blogging, I've been following, hundreds of blogs, checking in with different bloggers, artists who blog, and following those gets me lots of new ideas. I've made a lot of connections with other teachers. I've made connections with contemporary artists through my blog, and it inspires me to just be better and to do better.
Yeah.
And I think so. Yeah.